specification. And if you operate the machine with too high a pressure, as they did, it can damage the machine and make all results that you're doing in that analysis and subsequent analysis problematic. There are two tests: the testosterone-epitestosterone ratio, and the so-called synthetic test, although really they're both tests for outside of the body testosterone, but the so-called synthetic or foolproof test we've heard of. And I'm not going to quibble about the validity of the test per se, although I have many reasons to question the validity of the test per se. But I want to show you that even if you can get over all the errors in how they write things and whether it's a sample or not contamination issue, and the fact that they have highly variable results, even if you can get over that, I'm going to show you why the results as given aren't a positive test in the first place. The way I see it, what the lab does is it looks at the metabolites or breakdown products of testosterone and it examines them for a ratio of carbon-13 and carbon-12. That's carbon with 7 protons, no, both have six protons, 7 neutrons or 6 neutrons in the nucleus. And based on the ratio, they determine whether it's more likely or not to come from a plant. And this is the 2006 anti-doping code. It's clear that they're looking at metabolites with an S, plural. That's the way I believe it should be, and you'll see it'll be a bone of contention for us. We should see values here that are more negative than 3.8 in order to call the test positive for every value. There's only one value that I find abnormal, and that's minus 6.39. So as I look at the result, it's not even a positive test, even if you can get past the problems they had in producing it. Why do I say all metabolites have to be positive? You know, one has the feeling that these are great tests, but in fact they're based on a total sample population, as far as I can find, of 35 subjects in about 8 studies that have been given testosterone and had their ratios measured. That's not a whole lot of people to be confident about what you're doing, but that's the way the peer-reviewed science is. In any event, in every one of these cases, all the metabolites they looked at were abnormal when they looked at them for carbon isotope testing. And of note, all the Aguilera studies, that's out of UCLA. UCLA is the biggest anti-doping lab in the world. It does 3 times as many tests as the next largest, which is in Germany, and 4 times as many as the national lab in France, which is the LNDD, where Floyd's test was conducted. Now, the purpose of the water code is that labs are harmonized, or let's just say, if you're positive in one place, you should be positive in another. Or if you're negative in one place, you should be negative in another. Well, LNDD, the lab that tested the first sample, doesn't publish its positivity criteria, but Australia does. And they say that all metabolites must be abnormal. And more importantly, UCLA says that all must be abnormal. So, although we're not sure, because they haven't published their criteria, we're pretty, reading between the lines, we know how they're doing it. They're saying if any are abnormal, and we're saying all have to be abnormal. And it's clear that UCLA, who pioneered the development of this test, would not call Floyd's test a positive. Also interesting to note, because the LNDD, the lab that did Floyd's test, is calling anything more negative than 3 a positive. These are the results from the 73 medical student controls who did not take testosterone, who were examined to determine what the normal range was. And if you look at the normal medical students, what you find is they would be called positive, or at least some of them would, by the lab in France for taking testosterone. Now, if you're following my argument, you realize that makes no sense at all. You can't have known subjects who have not taken a drug, who are your negative controls, being tested positive in one lab, when clearly they're the prime examples of people who aren't positive. And we know that from the results that we've had from UCLA, where the rare athlete who has one abnormality is not called positive. And I would stress, by the way, this is an unusual situation. Usually all are positive, all are abnormal, I should say, or all are normal. Something that was written early in the press, and no doubt because of leaks and information that was wrongly given, was that Floyd had a very high level of testosterone. In fact, Dick Pound, the chairman of the World Anti-Doping Agency, has said he's surprised that Floyd wasn't violating every virgin within 100 miles. This is not my quote, this is Dick Pound's quote. Well, it's just not true. The amount of absolute testosterone in Floyd's document package is clearly stated as 45.4. And the amount that's high is a number over 200. So Floyd didn't have a high value at all. He had a perfectly normal value of 45.4. The test is not blind. It's supposed to be blind. That means the people who are doing the test are not supposed to know whose specimen they're looking at. And there's a spot on the anti-doping control form that Floyd fills out where he puts his name and address, and that's blacked out. But I think anybody who's following the tour, and certainly, I don't know, I can't say for sure, but my guess is if you're a lab tech working in a lab that's doing the tour samples, you know, you kind of have some interest in what people are doing. You know when you get the 7th or 8th sample from somebody who's taking cortisone from their hip, you know who's who. I'm not saying anything bad happened because of that, but I'm saying it shouldn't be. The process should be blind to the people who are doing the test, and that information should not be present. It can be looked at later for therapeutic use exemption if there's an abnormality in the test, but that should not be available on the form so that the lab could know who it was. How did we get this far? I don't know. Maybe originally, you know, it was just sloppy work. They thought something was a positive, they called it a positive, and then it sort of snowballed because news of the positive spread through the peloton before the tour was even completed. And the UCI didn't have that information, so I can only assume that it came from the lab. But there was a process here in the United States for a review board to dismiss the case before it went further. I want to show you it's not people in any lab or any country that can make mistakes, because here we have their review board denying Floyd's motion to dismiss. They met on the 18th of September, but they wrote the letter on the 15th, 3 days before they actually met. Now, I'm not saying that's anything more than a typographical error, but I'm saying when you have errors and they're compounded, you know, it doesn't give you confidence for what the process is about. As I look at it, there's an effort to sanction Floyd for a positive test that I don't call a positive test, can't call a positive test, it's not a positive test. But there's also a rule for sanctioning laboratories when they have a problem with analysis. And the way I look at it is the wrong person or the wrong entity is being accused here. Because it's not Floyd, it's the lab that I think should answer for this. These then are some of the arguments that I presented. The sample was mishandled, it was contaminated or degraded by their own criteria. The testing was unreliable, and at the bottom, it wasn't even a positive test, even if you forgive all those other errors. Once again, let me stress that these are just 4 or half a dozen out of 50, 60 arguments I have, and I haven't shown you the strongest arguments. Because I mean, if they're going to change the laboratory document package and the numbers in response to my first slideshow, I'm not about to have all our evidence out in the open before the arbitration hearing. But the point is also, and what the Floyd Fairness Fund about, is if there are mistakes and there are problems, to try to learn from them so that it doesn't happen again. Let me just say one other little thing. Has this happened to this lab before? You know, before I was involved in this, I had heard about problems in the lab, and I didn't really have the information and kind of didn't pay a whole lot of attention. But there are what we call whistleblower documents I received from a few different sources, information that leads me to suspect that the lab has had it wrong many times. Here they issued a positive test result, and they got the date wrong, and so withdrew their positive result from the National Governing Body. Here, they issued a positive test and realized that the lab number was wrong, and issued a retraction. Here, they got the wrong athlete and issued a retraction. And the strongest one of all, as far as I'm concerned, is the one that occurred in July of 2006, not for Floyd, but for another athlete, where they accused the athlete of doping and then realized that their machine or their control urines had been contaminated and withdrew that positive report after they had issued it. And then this is the letter from the water science director. These documents have been sent to me anonymously. They are not independently verified. We have asked them to tell us whether it's true or not. I know a couple of reporters have spoken to the water science director and asked him about it, and he's basically said, I can't tell you, but yeah. So this is not the first time there's been a problem. And really, it's as I see it,